Hello, welcome to This Side of the Ceiling. I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Jill, and we're two good friends trying to live this life on this side of the ceiling as abundantly as Christ has called us to.
We are by no means experts, but we love to study His Word and share everything that He has revealed and taught us.
So come along with us as we open up the scriptures and dive into His wonderful Word.
Hello, welcome back to This Side of the Ceiling, and we are still in the life of David, kind of finishing up David's life.
That's right. And it's not going as well for him as an
No.
older person. You know, you think when you get older, you would have more things figured out. And a lot of times in the stories of these kings, it's when they get older and complacent that things don't go well.
Right, yeah, and it didn't go well for David. It started with his children. And we know now that one of his sons, Absalom, killed his other son, Amnon.
Because Amnon
Because
had raped.
Amnon had raped
That's
his
right.
sister. So yeah, it's not good. And we left David at the end of where Joab, David wants Absalom back. Joab gives the advice, probably you shouldn't, and David does bring Absalom back.
Yeah, Joab sets up, he confronts him with this woman to convict him, and David realizes Joab's behind him, and he does. He brings him
Right.
back. And but all's not well, and we learn at the end of that chapter that even though Absalom comes back, the king says he is not to come into my presence. And it says that Absalom had to live apart in his own house, and that doesn't sit well with Absalom.
Right.
And so just a reminder of who Absalom is, I think it's interesting to notice in verse 14 it says, "Now in all of Israel there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head there was no blemish on him."
Yeah.
That's something to be said.
Right. Yeah.
And then it talks about how he had this hair. You know, people, which is going to be a problem for him. But at the end of once a year, he would cut his hair because it was so heavy and it weighed 200 shekels, which was a lot. And so Absalom has children. He names a daughter after his sister that had been raped, but he is living apart. He's living in Jerusalem, but he hasn't seen the king. And so finally he's had it. He goes to Joab and tries to get Joab's attention. Joab ignores him, and Absalom sets his barley on fire. And so Joab shows up and he says, "I want to see the king. And why'd you bring me back if I'm not going to see the king?" So at the end of chapter 14, Joab goes to the king and tells him, and the king summons Absalom. Absalom comes to the king. He bows in front of him, and the king kisses Absalom.
Right.
So, sounds like all is well. But then we realize that Absalom has a plan.
Right. Yeah. The title of chapter 15, 2 Samuel 15 in my Bible says Absalom's Conspiracy.
Yes. So, Absalom starts, first of all, he's got to play the part. So the very first verse, we see that he gets himself a chariot and some horses. And he's got 50 men that are going to run before him. So he wants to look the part. I mean, he already is beautiful.
Right.
And we know today when, beauty ushers you into the room. Mm-hmm. And so he looks the part because he's beautiful. He's got this chariot and people following him. And he plants himself at the gate of Jerusalem. And we see that he watches for people that are coming into Jerusalem that want to have a claim to bring before the king. And he inserts himself before they get there and says, well, what do you want? And, where are you from? And they tell him, and Absalom says, "Oh, well, unfortunately, there's nobody here to hear you, but if I was king, I would hear you. Oh, I wish I was king and I would hear you." And he kisses them, and which was a form of showing respect and honor. And so verse 6 says, "Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel." Mm-hmm. So he does this over a period of 4 years. And what happens is he's stealing the hearts of the people from the king. And the king, again, is losing touch with his people because he's older and he's not on top of this. So anyway, it comes to a head when Absalom asks King David, if he can go away to Hebron to fulfill a vow. And David lets him. But secretly, Absalom takes 200 men with him. And it says in verse 11 of chapter 15, with Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in innocence and knew nothing. So they don't know. Absalom's planning all of this. But he sends for Ahithophel, which is David's counselor. Yeah. Also,
Bathsheba's grandfather.
Yes, who we know has not forgotten what David has done there. And so they, a messenger, they are all growing. And it says the people with Absalom kept increasing. So then if you read in verse 13, a messenger comes to David and tells him the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. And David says to all of his servants, arise, let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants all follow him. And I think it's interesting to notice here that David's concern is for the people.
Right.
He's like, if we let this happen, they're going to announce him king and they're going to come and kill everybody. And David doesn't want to destroy Jerusalem and the people.
Right.
So David's like, let me leave.
Right.
Let me get out of here.
Save
yeah.
Jerusalem.
He's going to let him have the kingdom. Because he doesn't want to,
cause a war.
Yeah. Which does say a lot for David. And I don't know, you look back at some of the kings that are going to come in the future of the divided kingdom, and they were all out. They would kill all their brothers and their family so that they could be king. And David is thinking about, oh, this is not good. Let me leave. I'm the problem. I'll just leave.
Right.
And so, you really should go back and read some of this because you see who David's friends are. They come out to go with him. And so all of David's loyal people go with him. And there are old people that want to go with him. And David's like, you just stay. You're too old. And anyway, it's a sad progression. They're leaving. And David is saying goodbye to some people. And anyway, I want us to get to, so David's leaving and the priests want to take the ark, and David says, don't take the ark. The ark needs to stay in the temple. And, David is leaving this up to God. And he says, if it's God's will that I come back to the city, if I find favor in the eyes of God, he'll bring me back and I'll be able to see the ark again. So he's trusting in God. He's not trying to take what he can.
Right.
He's just going to get out. So I want to pick up reading. Let's read in chapter 15. If you want to read, Kelsey, let's read verse 30 through the end of the chapter. And just know that, the ark has come, but David has sent it back to the temple. And it's a sad time for the people as they're watching the king leave.
Right. It says, but David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too and were weeping as they went up. Now David had been told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, O Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, if you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their 2 sons, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear. So David's friend Hushai arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city.
Okay, so if you've ever been to Jerusalem, it's kind of in a bowl almost like, and it has these mountains around it. And notice where David flees. He flees Jerusalem and goes to the Mount of Olives.
Yes.
And he's weeping and he's praying, and he's been betrayed not only by his son, but by his counselor, Ahithophel, who he turned to for advice. And he prays, Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness, because Ahithophel's wise.
Right.
So he knows that Ahithophel will tell him good advice. And this prayer is answered really quick because this Hushai comes and he's going to be the secret ears for David.
Right. Yeah.
But, David is weeping and fleeing away from Jerusalem.
Yeah. And we also, we get David's journal again in Psalm. And there is a psalm that says this is a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. So that's where I'm going to go, and it's Psalm 3. So I'm just going to read Psalm 3. It says, O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you are a shield around me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. So I want to look at that psalm again. And we've done this several times with David's psalms, and they seem to follow the same pattern over and over. And verses 1 and 2, he gets real with his pain and what's happening. He says, O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying God will not deliver him. And so he kind of gets real with God and just says, I'm in trouble. I've got lots of foes. Absalom's leading them, and things aren't good. But then he shifts the focus right away. Notice in verse 3, he says, he takes it even off of himself. He says, but you are a shield around me, O Lord. So he, me, and then you.
Yeah.
But you are a shield. He just tells God, I have the faith that you're my shield. And so he shifts the focus. You are a shield around me. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cry aloud. And then in verse 5 and 6, he gets a peace. That peace that's beyond understanding. When we take our prayers to the Lord, it says we will have that peace. But it says, I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. He kind of writes or says his faith right there. And to lie down and sleep comes from the Lord when you're having to flee.
Yeah, he's being pursued, and his life is in danger.
Right. And so he kind of gives God his faith. And then he says, arise, O Lord, deliver me, kind of believing it. And the word arise is the same word that says, how many rise up against me? And so he's turning that to arise, O Lord. And then it says, deliver me, O my God. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. And again, big picture, it's about the people. It's not really about him by the end of the psalm.
I think that David, we see kind of, it just reminds me a little back when Saul was chasing him. David's at his finest when he gets threatened.
Right.
When he's all happy and bored in the castle, that's when he gets in trouble.
Right.
But when Saul's after him, or when Absalom's about to send a group out to kill him, take over the throne, that's when David goes, wait a minute.
Yeah.
so many times when he was running from Saul and he had chances to kill Saul, he would say, no, I'm not going to take the kingdom. God's promised me the kingdom and he'll give it to me on his timing. And David would never kill Saul. Mm-hmm. And so now we see him saying, I'm going to wait and see what God wants. And he, all those things that you just read, and even when he said God answered me from his holy hill, that Mount of Olives. Yeah, right. And he says, I'm going to trust. And when people say, well, take the Ark of the Covenant. No, if God wants me to have it, he'll bring it to me. I'm not going to take.
Right.
We see that heart that's going to trust God, even if, what did you read? 10,000s of people have set themselves against me.
Yeah.
And that's what it felt like for him.
Yeah, and the prayers really refocus him.
Yeah.
It just feels like the prayers give you perspective on your faith, on your life, on just everything that's happening. And so it's so important, I think, to voice those prayers to God.
And to turn it, like you said, from, okay, Lord, I'm really scared, this is what's happening, but you are my shield, and you are my hope.
Right.
So I think David does that. Well, I also want to point out, I just can't get over the fact that here David is on the Mount of Olives weeping. Because as we have been studying this, we have seen lots of parallels to David's life and to Jesus. Can you think of some of the ones that we've talked about?
Just being a shepherd.
Yeah, shepherds.
So we talked about
they
that.
both were born in Bethlehem. They're both from the tribe of Judah. They're both kings.
Right.
And so here again, we see that they both experience a night weeping on the Mount of Olives. And I want to flip over to Jesus's night and just read that for you, because it's the same a little bit. In Matthew 26, it says, and I'm going to start back up at verse 30 first, just that one verse, because it says, this is at the Last Supper, and right, Jesus is just about to tell Peter that he's going to deny him, but it says he sung a hymn and they went out to the Mount of Olives. So Mount of Olives, just like David.
Right.
And then, Jesus is there and he's praying and his disciples are sleeping. And it says in verse 38, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going with a little further, he fell on his face and prayed again, saying, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And, they keep falling asleep. Mm-hmm. But we see David praying on the Mount of Olives. We see Jesus praying. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Jesus was crying, but it said he was sweating. Yeah, I like that. And then if you go further, we see the betrayal. I'm just going to skip down further. Verse 47. While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs, and the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign and said, the one I kiss is the man, to seize him. And Judas came up to Jesus and said, greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Jesus said to him, friend, do what you have come to do. So not only that, but they both were betrayed.
Right.
Jesus is betrayed by one of the disciples, one of his close 12. And David is betrayed by his son and his counselor. And, there are just so many, they both were in danger of their life. Right. David, it looks like Absalom's going to send people to kill him. Mm-hmm. Jesus, they're sending him and he will die.
Right.
So there's just so many. If we were to, if I were to keep reading in Matthew, we would see that Peter gets out his sword and cuts off the ear. Uh-huh. And if we had kept reading back in 2 Samuel, there's a guy named Shema that comes and starts cursing Jesus, and his people say, do you want us to kill him? And he's like, no, don't.
Cursing David.
Yeah, cursing David. So there's just so many little parallels of this at this point. But one difference is, David goes up to the mountain fleeing Jerusalem, and God's going to save him at this point. But Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, and he's going to go down into Jerusalem and die.
Yeah.
And so David goes up to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus is going to walk off the Mount of Olives right back to Jerusalem and die. But Jesus fulfills the scriptures, and David gives us a glimpse into what it looks like to have a heart after God. And the Psalms really show us that.
Yeah, it just shows us how important it is to pray.
Yeah, and to know that God is listening and answering in our darkest times. And there is more to that story that we'll get to later.
Yeah. Thanks for listening and journeying with us on this side of the ceiling. See you next time.